I'll go in a practical direction if that's okay. Um, so in this listening practice, your album's called Listen Deep. We should
Mhm.
mention that. We'll mention it again at the end. But listening's big in your process. And the question, or kind of just to get your thoughts as far as like what does that look like? As far as like passing it along to listeners, chances are they probably have a connection to nature if they're listening to this. Most likely they're a creative person if you're listening to this.
Mhm.
So I mean, what does your process look like? Do you have is it more formal or is it something that's just kind of more intuitive? Um, how might a person say, yeah, I really do want to listen to nature next time I go outside? What might that look like for somebody who might not quite have that in place already?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have spent a lot of time really clearly understanding what I need in order to be in that space of creating. Um, so I'm very clear on that. And for me, it's about having a clear energetic space, in my home, my partner and our two young kids and our pets and our garden and other things that need my care. And I need to create an energetic container that seals out those other demands for a short period of time in order to dedicate myself to listening. That's step one. So, whether that means prioritizing your creative space in those few moments when the house is empty, or if you have the ability to, utilize a library or a favorite park or a camp out overnight or whatever the case may be, a hike, but creating a space where you're either solo or you're with people who um, don't place demands on you, right? Like I cannot be in the creative mode when I'm with my 7 and 10-year-old because my nervous system is attuned to them. So that's the first thing, is eliminating those other distractions for whatever period of time. And then secondly, making that a priority. When we have those few spare moments or we have the ability to carve out space in our lives, there are a million logistical and practical demands that are calling for our attention. But for me, I was very, very clear, especially after coming out of raising really tiny kids, that my creative space is where I create the energy that I need to live. Like that is where I'm gathering fuel to do my life. So I feel really good about making that my top priority when I have the time. Um, and then the third thing I would say is paying a lot of attention to what other practices you see and hear from other artists, other creatives, other people who are really embodied, and trying out a range of different practices to see what gets your creative energy flowing, what gets you into that space of receptivity. I know for some it's listening to music, for some it's certain kinds of movement, you know, for some it's running, for some it's yoga, for some it's meditation. I have one friend who is in her creative space when she's on a flying trapeze, whatever extremity you need, but really listening to these kinds of conversations from other artists is what's given me these little hints of like breadcrumbs on the trail, to follow, to find the practices that work for me. And my practice is not rigid. It's very, very fluid. I have to be able to move with the tides of what's happening in my body, in our wider world, in my day-to-day life. And I will point to one of the artists who's been most instrumental in helping me shape my creative path has been Elizabeth Gilbert. I don't know if you've ever discussed Liz Gilbert's work on this show, but her conversations, particularly around her book Big Magic, were really instrumental, and some of her public lectures were really instrumental in helping me to explore the practices that helped that inner creative voice grow stronger for me. So I have looked to other artists whose work really resonates, and whose voice really resonates, and really tried everything that they told me to try that sounded remotely attractive, and keeping the things that I loved and freely discarding the rest. So I believe, for me, in that fluidity of trying anything that calls to your curiosity until you find what resonates and what works.
Yeah, do you have anywhere to go with that, Nicole? Before we
No, I mean, I
move on?
connect with a lot of that. I also love Elizabeth Gilbert's work. So, but yeah, I guess like I don't I don't think I have anything like specific in response to that. I was curious if there was anything that like stood out kind of as being like maybe like the most like rewarding part of kind of like the process of putting this new project out so far.
Of putting it out or creating it?
I'd say maybe both.
Okay.
I guess like I could see those as two separate things. So both.
Yeah. Creating this album, while I was creating this album, I absolutely experienced the purest moments of like creative joy and ecstasy that I've ever touched in my lifetime. And that all really comes back to the experiences of collaborating. You know, back to my memories this past year and a half of creating the music that I made with Ben Leinbach. We would spend days in his home studio where I would walk in with work that was completely unknown to him. He'd never heard anything about it. And I'd lay down a vibe, either just a beat or a song in reference, or try to verbally describe like the musical tone that I was going for in a piece. And he would begin by laying down a beat for us to work with. And then we would build like a few little sprinklings of musical layers on top of that without ever touching the poetry. And then we would bring in the poetry and lay down the voice and the words and the tone over that little baseline of the music. And from there, then we would start exploring these sound patterns to bring in. And where my words were creating really like a journey, you know, kind of navigating us through this poetic journey through space, Ben was bringing in these beautiful sounds that were creating like this sonic landscape through which that journey was going to traverse. And he was able to see and feel and hear a structure for these songs that was just untouchable for me. So I was pulling in the shape of the words, he was pulling in the shape of the sounds, I was pulling in the voice. And then there were these moments of the creative process where we'd hear the beginnings of this music and we'd be listening to it in the studio, and I would hear my voice and I would hear his bass line, and then I would feel and hear him live in front of me, like playing an acoustic guitar and just like weaving these notes around my voice. And that experience of just watching that unfold was pure joy, like pure joy. And that feeling that like nothing else in the world existed. So that was the highlight of creating it, for sure. And then the highlight of releasing it has been seeing just this little beginning sprinkling of feedback for people who experience my work and feel like immediately called to go to the ocean, or feel immediately called to go connect with a forest. Because about 10 years ago, when I was wrapping up this year in Africa, and I was, you know, looking at the rest of my life and looking at returning to the United States and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to make an impact and who I wanted to be, I crafted this mission statement where I became really clear that I think my highest capacity on Earth this time around is to inspire people into closer connection with nature, because I have experienced and I believe that when we are in connection with nature and in connection with our higher selves, we are kinder, more compassionate, more empathetic, and we make overall better decisions about how we're going to treat ourselves and how we're going to treat others, including our planet. So when I see people receive my music and then feel compelled to go out into nature and look around and listen and pay attention and connect and offer whatever their own flavor of gratitude is, you know, back into the earth, that's it. That's the mission. So just to see the beginnings of that has been really beautiful and really gratifying. And yeah, it feels very settling, feels very calming for me to experience that. It feels like it's like I'm finally connecting as a human being, you know, from whatever's going on deep inside my heart is reaching deep inside others' hearts. And that's that magic space that art allows us to kind of bypass the brain and connect more from the deeper experience of who we are.